Welcome back to the deep dive. Some guitar pedals, they add an effect. But others, they fundamentally change how we think about a specific sound.
For sure.
And today, we're taking a single piece of gear, just a standard stomp box, improving how it redefined the whole concept of guitar compression. We're going deep into the Boss CP1X compressor, which hit the market back in 2016.
This is a fantastic choice for a deep dive because compression is so often the least understood effect on a pedal board.
It's the silent hero.
It is, the silent hero, but traditionally it's also been the source of the most frustration for players.
Exactly. So our mission is to understand the technological breakthrough that Bias has achieved here. They use something they call multi-dimensional processing, or MDP, and somehow managed to pack true studio-grade multi-band precision into a tiny little box.
Right. And our sources all call this a next-generation compressor.
They do, and we need to uncover the precise engineering behind that praise.
Well, to really appreciate the innovation, you have to look at the landscape before 2016. The challenge was, it was actually pretty simple. The vast majority of stomp box compressors,
The old ones, like the classic orange or red ones we all know.
exactly, whether they were based on optical or, OTA circuits, they were all inherently single-band processors.
So they were definitely coloring the sound, which, a lot of players love. But they were also just limited by the tech, right?
Precisely. They treat your entire guitar signal from the lowest bass string to the highest harmonic as one massive frequency lump.
Just one thing.
Just one thing. So when the compressor hits its threshold, it just squeezes everything uniformly. Imagine trying to sculpt a statue by squeezing the entire block of marble at once.
Yeah, you can't.
You just end up with a mess. And the classic results are that your low end becomes muddy or overly squashed, or your clean treble frequencies just get dulled. They lose all their life. The CP1X was built specifically to solve this exact problem.
Okay, let's unpack this then. What exactly is MDP, multidimensional processing, and why does it create such a huge architectural gulf between this pedal and those classic single-band designs?
The MDP engine turns the CP1X from a simple squashing tool into a true dynamic analysis tool. The core difference is that it operates as a multi-band dynamic processor.
Okay.
So instead of that one big lump of frequency, it's listening to your guitar signal and instantly splitting it into multiple independent frequency bands.
And what happens once the signal is split up like that?
This is where the intelligence really comes in. It analyzes the specific dynamics of each of those bands on its own and applies compression only where it's truly needed.
Oh, okay.
Think about it. A sustained low E string has completely different dynamic needs than, say, a sharp plucked high G string.
Right, totally different envelopes.
Totally. And a traditional compressor would have to apply the same fixed attack and release time to both of those notes, leading to either a slow, muddy low end or a fast, dull high end.
But the CP1X can actually treat those two things differently, in real time.
Exactly. It can apply a lightning-fast attack to the high frequencies to tame any harsh pick attack and maintain clarity, while at the same time applying a much slower, more musical release to the bass frequencies, so they decay naturally without any of that unwanted pumping.
The pumping, that's the word. That audible swell or breathing sound you get when a single-band compressor just can't keep up.
It's the bane of transparent compression.
Yeah.
And the CT1X just avoids it entirely, which is a huge deal for professional players who need that consistency. This technical reliability means it's also especially good for extended range instruments.
Your 7 and 8 string guitars.
Yeah, where controlling those massive, hot, low frequencies it's everything. The MDP engine processes those complex signals without ever falling apart.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, because this sounds like some massive rack-mounted digital brain. How in the world does the pedal achieve this intelligence internally while keeping such a simple, user-friendly, four-knob interface? That seems like a total paradox.
It's a remarkable feat of design, really. Internally, the MDP engine has several things working together. We mentioned the real-time frequency analysis, but the key to its intelligence is the adaptive attack and release.
Adaptive, so it's changing on the fly.
Right. The pedal doesn't rely on fixed timing. It adjusts the attack and release parameters automatically based on what you're playing.
So the player sets sort of macro-level direction, and the pedal fine-tunes the microseconds.
Precisely. You hit a hard strum, it reacts one way. You play a gentle, sustained note, it reacts completely differently. It also features intelligent harmonic compensation.
What does that do?
It makes sure that when it compresses the main note, it doesn't accidentally flatten or destroy all the crucial overtones that give your instrument its character and it's air.
That harmonic compensation must be why players describe it as sounding three-dimensional instead of just flattened.
Absolutely. And under all of this, you've got an extremely low noise floor and studio-grade headroom. That headroom is vital because it means the pedal can handle the hottest active pickups or the loudest boost signals without clipping. A huge issue with vintage-style compressors.
Okay, let's focus on those controls then. Level, attack, ratio, and compression. If the pedal is doing so much on its own, what are these knobs actually for? It almost sounds like the machine is doing all the work.
Well, the four knobs are designed not for surgical fixed timing, but for tonal shaping, for flavor. They give you macro control over the compression style.
Okay, give me an example with the attack knob. If the pedal is already adapting the attack time, what is that knob actually doing when I turn it?
The attack knob is all about transient shaping. So if you set it fast, you're telling the MDP engine, hey, I want a tighter, more immediate sound. It'll clamp down hard on the initial pick attack. But if you set it slower, you're telling the engine to let more of that initial thump pass through before the compression kicks in. That gives you a more open or percussive sound. It's a flavor control, not a fixed timer.
I see. And the ratio and compression knobs work together, I assume.
Yeah, the compression knob is basically your threshold and the overall amount of gain reduction, how hard you're pushing the engine. The ratio knob then dictates how severe that reduction is. But because it's a multi-band process, those knobs are just influencing the overall dynamic shape, while the intelligence inside keeps the tone musical.
Now, with this kind of subtle, transparent compression, it can be really hard to tell how much work the pedal is actually doing in a live mix. How does the CP1X solve that problem?
That's where the 4-stage LED gain reduction meter is so critical.
Like on a studio rack unit.
Exactly. A feature you almost never find on a compact pedal. It gives you immediate, real-time visual feedback on exactly how much compression is being applied. No more guesswork. You can set your levels accurately on a dark stage or in the studio, which is just essential when your goal is transparent sweetening.
It makes perfect sense. This whole intelligence system is why it feels so natural. It's maximizing dynamics without all those side effects. We tolerated them for decades.
Absolutely. It's audio sculpting, not audio squashing.
Let's talk about the sound itself. We keep saying transparency, but let's get specific. What are the definitive tonal characteristics of the CP1X? If a player plugs this in, what are they guaranteed to hear or not hear?
The very first thing you notice is crystal clear note definition, no matter how complex the chords are. The main things players and engineers point to are zero mud buildup, accurate handling of low notes without that weird, unnatural volume swell.
The pumping again.
Yep. And a treble response that stays incredibly bright, open, and natural. The key takeaway is just how even the response is across the whole neck, all the strings.
So it's not really adding its own character, it's just refining and leveling the character that's already there.
Exactly. It's an enhancer, not an imposer. It just lets the natural voice of your guitar and your amp shine through while making everything sound more polished and cohesive, like your guitar signal went to finishing school.
I like that. So how does the application change depending on how hard you push that main compression knob? Let's break it down into the 3 zones: low, medium, and high.
Okay, starting with low compression, this is the famous always-on setting. The effect is almost imperceptible, but it's essential. It tightens the lows, subtly adds sustain, and it balances string volume without killing your playing dynamics.
And what kind of music is that perfect for?
This setting is just paramount for genres like country, ambient textures, clean pop, and especially modern worship music, where maximum clarity is. It's just non-negotiable. It makes the guitar feel better to play without actually sounding compressed.
A transparent buffer that also smooths everything out.
Yes.
What about medium compression?
Moving to medium, the tone becomes really smooth, super articulate, and just distinctly polished. This is the sweet spot for steady rhythm guitar, funky chord stabs, that kind of thing. It ensures every note in a fast run of 16th notes is delivered at a consistent volume.
Gives your rhythm track a lot of punch.
Incredible punch and authority, yeah, without the tone becoming thin or weak.
Okay, and finally, when we crank that knob to high, does the digital engine finally start to sound harsh or, artificial?
This is where the MDP tech really proves its worth. At high compression, you're effectively getting studio-grade limiting behavior. It's perfect for lead solos, slide guitar, adding tons of sustain. And because the engine is managing all those frequencies independently, you get that sustain without the typical hiss or fizz that just plagues single-band compressors when you push them this hard.
It stays clean.
It stays musical and clean even under massive gain reduction.
Let's focus on those two use cases you brought up, worship guitar and extended range guitars. They really illustrate why this transparency thing is king.
For sure. I mean, these were the early adopters who instantly got what the CP1X was about. In worship music, the sounds are often huge, clean, layered with delay and reverb.
A lot going on.
A lot going on. And if a traditional compressor introduces any mud or noise, the whole atmosphere just collapses. The CP1X ensures every delicate note in a complex ambient patch rings true. It provides that rock-solid consistency, which has made it a professional staple in that community.
And for the 7 and 8 string players who are dealing with, almost bass guitar frequencies.
It's absolutely essential. Traditional compression often turns a low B or an F-sharp string into just mush, a muddy, indistinct wobble that the compressor can't recover from fast enough. Because the CP1X isolates that low-frequency info, it manages the fundamental note perfectly, keeping the low end tight, clear, and articulated, even with super aggressive, high-output active pickups.
So what does this all mean then? The CP1X is clearly a landmark product. It didn't just iterate on compression, it really forced a new technological standard. How did it change the landscape for BOS and for guitar players in general?
It was a massive statement from Boss S. It was their first MDP-based guitar compressor, and it signaled a huge shift toward intelligent digital processing for standard effects. When it launched, players were genuinely shocked by how natural and polished it sounded.
This wasn't the sound they were expecting from a compact mass-market Boss S pedal.
Not at all. And the highest praise it got, really, was that it was immediately compared to these sophisticated high-end studio rack units that cost thousands of dollars.
That comparison alone says everything, doesn't it?
It's a huge indicator of the paradigm shift. It became an instant favorite for pro touring rigs, and it's frequently cited as that one desert island compressor, the single pedal you'd rely on for fidelity and consistency. It redefined the quality floor for compact compressors.
Now, in the spirit of a balanced deep dive, we have to look at the other side. The considerations, the drawbacks that the sources mentioned. Not every player wants surgical transparency.
Right. That is the central philosophical trade-off here. The CP1X is emphatically not a vintage-colored compressor. If a player is looking for that specific sound, that heavy, audible squish and the warm coloration from an old Dynacomp or a classic optical unit,
this isn't it.
The CP1X will not deliver that. It is designed to be, unseen, unheard, and uncolored.
So it's really a pedal for the modern player who puts fidelity above nostalgia.
Precisely. It has that refined, modern digital engine feel. And yeah, the price point is higher than a lot of compact analog compressors, but the sources all agree that the advanced tech inside that durable Boss S enclosure completely justifies the cost.
You mentioned one final consideration that I find really fascinating, that the pedal is, paradoxically, almost too good.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing to say, but because the compression is so accurate, so artifact-free, it actually reveals exactly what you're playing.
Nowhere to hide.
Nowhere to hide. If you have sloppy dynamics, inconsistent picking, or poor muting technique, the CP1X will level out the volume, sure, but it will also expose those flaws right to the listener. It kind of forces you to elevate your game.
This deep dive really confirms it. Boss S successfully delivered a true studio-quality multi-band dynamic processor disguised as a durable little stomp box. Its MDP engine lets it deliver this controlled, transparent compression that enhances feel and consistency without, stomping all over the core character of your instrument. It's pretty much the definition of an essential always-on compressor.
And the fascinating implication here, it goes beyond just this one effect. If this intelligent MDP technology can so drastically redefine a standard decades-old effect like compression, making it analytical, transparent, and artifact-free, it just raises a huge question for the whole industry. Which is, what happens when this level of intelligence and transparency gets applied universally to other historically analog-bound effects? What if a distortion pedal could analyze and compensate for harmonics in real time? Or a delay could adapt its repeats based on your playing tempo? What new possibilities open up for clean, complex tone sculpting? That's the future that the CP1X really kicked the door open to.
Okay, let's unpack this. When most people think about effects pedals, They jump to the flashy ones.
Oh, yeah, the distortion, the chorus, maybe delay.
Exactly, the ones that really roar or swirl. But there's this quiet hero on the modern pedal board, one that really dictates the feel, the consistency.
And the sustain, right, that endless hang time.
That's the one. The compressor. And it's not just about leveling out volume, is it? It's more fundamental.
Absolutely. It's dynamics processing. It helps those quiet notes bloom, make sure the loud ones don't disappear too fast. It's kind of the engine room of your tone, even if it's often the most, let's say, misunderstood effect on the board.
Right. Because without it, things can get messy. A clean note might just vanish, or a subtle lick gets totally lost.
Yeah, but with it, everything just sounds articulated,
Yeah.
powerful, consistent.
And if you want to trace the history of putting that kind of studio power into a little stomp box, making it affordable, making it accessible, well, one name just keeps coming up.
BOSS, and specifically the CS series.
Precisely. Which is why today we're doing a deep dive into that foundational BOSS CS line, the compression sustainer.
We're starting right at the beginning with the CS1, then looking at how it evolved into the more refined CS2, and finally landing on the one that's still around today, the CS3.
Our mission here is to see how BOSS didn't just make a compressor pedal, they really pioneered bringing that studio-level dynamics control right onto the pedal board. They kind of defined an era.
And the sources we're looking at, they detail these really fundamental shifts, changes in the circuits, the knobs you could turn, the actual sound you got out of them. It's like an evolution in 3 acts.
Yeah, it really is.
And it's a perfect case study, I think. It shows this constant balancing act the industry does. You've got the desire for that vintage warmth, that organic musical thing.
Right, that feel.
Versus the modern need for precision, consistency, low noise, and giving the player total control. So yeah, let's set the stage. How did BOSS solve that need for clean, endless sustain?
Okay, let's start at the beginning. The genesis. CS1 compression sustainer. It landed in 1978.
I had a pretty short run, actually, only about 4 years until 82, but incredibly influential years.
It was BOS's first compressor, right? Putting dynamics control firmly in that compact pedal format.
Yeah, and you got to understand, the CS1 wasn't just another pedal. It was like a statement. Before this, getting good compression usually meant bulky rack gear, expensive stuff.
Or maybe some obscure DIY thing.
Exactly. The CS1 brought that studio idea, smooth, clean sustain to everyday musicians. It was aimed mostly at players needing consistency, especially with clean tones where every little inconsistency just jumps out at you.
And the core of its sound, the thing that gives it that warm, almost legendary character now, is its internal architecture. It was built around an analog optical circuit.
That's the key detail, optical compression. It's fundamentally different from what came later. It uses something called a photocoupler.
Okay, break that down. Photocoupler.
It's basically 2 parts sealed together, an LED, a little light.
Light emitting diode.
Yep. And an LDR, a light-dependent resistor, a resistor whose resistance changes based on how much light hits it.
So how does that actually compress the guitar signal?
Well, your guitar signal comes in, and it makes that internal LED glow. The louder your signal, the brighter the LED shines.
Yeah.
That light then hits the LDR. And the brighter the light, the lower the LDR's resistance gets. That lower resistance then turns down the signal's gain. So the compression is literally handled by light, a physical reaction.
Wow. And that immediately connects it to some really high-end classic studio gear, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge part of why the CS1 is still so sought after. When you hear optical compression, you think of things like the Teletronics LA2A, big, often tube-driven units.
Right, those legendary compressors.
Now, the CS1 is solid state, not tube, but the basic idea, light controlling the compression, is similar. It gave you a taste of that warm, musical studio sound in a little box. Optical circuits tend to react a bit slower, maybe more non-linearly, organically than pure electronic methods.
That slower and nonlinear part sounds key to the feel, but the controls on the outside were dead simple.
Super simple, just 2 knobs. Level for your overall output volume, and sustain, which basically controlled how much squeeze you applied and therefore how long the note rang out.
And what's really striking is what wasn't there.
Right. No attack control. That's crucial. The attack time, how fast the compressor grabs the note, and the release time, how fast it lets go, were fixed, baked into the circuit design.
That seems like a bold move for a dynamics pedal. You just get what they give you.
Well, the idea was simplicity. Plug and play. They optimized the timing for guitar, aiming for something generally musical for rhythm and lead playing. You set the amount of compression with sustain, and the unique kind of flow optical circuit did its thing with the timing. That's part of why it feels so organic. The speed is tied to that slightly sluggish, smooth way the light reacts.
And the sound people describe as smooth,
Mhm.
natural, maybe a bit colored.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't meant to be an aggressive in-your-face effect. Think about who used it. Clean funk players needing every strum to be perfectly even.
Country chicken pickers needing that super articulate snap.
Or lead players wanting notes to hang forever in a ballad without getting thin or distorted. That gentle, nonlinear optical squeeze was perfect for that foundational sustain.
Now, you mentioned how compression can sometimes darken the tone. The CS1 actually had a way to deal with that, didn't it? A little switch.
It did. The mode switch. You could choose normal or treble emphasis.
Why the treble mode? What was that solving?
It's a classic compression problem, really. When you squash a signal hard, you reduce the peaks, and often the result sounds duller, darker, you lose some high-end sparkle.
Yeah, the sound gets kind of muffled.
Exactly. So the treble mode was the CS1's clever fix. Flick that switch, and it actively boosted the high frequencies. It put the brightness back in. Super useful if you were using, say, darker humbuckers or playing through an amp that rolled off the top end naturally. It helped the compressed sound cut through.
So it's a classic, revered pedal. But being pioneering tech from '78, it wasn't perfect, right? What were the drawbacks?
Well, compared to later pedals, it definitely had a noticeable noise floor. You'd hear some hiss, especially if you crank the sustain. But maybe the most interesting drawback, which collectors actually love now, is the optical cell itself.
You mean how they age?
Precisely. Those photocoupler parts, especially the LDR, they change over decades. They don't react exactly the same way now as they did brand new. So two vintage CS1s side by side might sound subtly different. It gives them this unique, slightly unpredictable vintage character. It's a cool quirk of its physical, light-based design.
So the CS1 really put BOSS on the map for dynamics, defined that clean, warm sustain for the compact pedal world. But relying on those unique, sometimes aging parts and lacking that attack control, it set the stage. But BOSS obviously knew they needed to evolve and fasten.
Oh.
Right, that short 4-year run of the CS1 takes us straight to phase 2. The CS2 compression sustainer came out in '81, ran till '86.
And the fact they replaced the CS1 so quickly tells you something. The market, or maybe the engineers themselves, wanted more precision, more consistency than that optical circuit could really deliver reliably at scale.
So this wasn't just a tweak. It was a major overhaul under the hood.
Monumental. They completely ditched the optical photocoupler thing, moved entirely to an analog VCA design, voltage-controlled amplifier.
VCA. Okay, that sounds more electronic, less reliant on light bulbs.
Exactly. If the CS1 was like controlling volume with a light dimmer smooth, but maybe a bit slow and variable, the VCA is like a super fast, precise electronic switch. The gain reduction is controlled directly by a voltage signal, not by physical light.
And what did that VCA approach actually give them? What were the benefits?
Consistency, speed, and precision. Those were the big wins. And crucially, it allowed for much more consistent mass production.
So every CS2 off the line would behave much more predictably than the CS1s.
That's the idea. The VCA circuit used a specific integrated circuit, an IC chip, usually the NE570 or 571, called a compander to handle the gain reduction. This chip gave a much more linear, predictable response than the optical cell ever could. The compression was faster, more reliable, unit to unit.
Okay, hang on. Compander. That sounds technical, but you said it's key, especially for noise.
Yeah, it's a clever bit of engineering. Compander is short for compressor expander. It's a noise reduction trick.
How does it work?
On the way in, the circuit acts as a compressor, squashing the dynamic range like you'd expect. But then after the main circuit noise is introduced, but before the signal goes out, there's a complementary expander circuit. This restores the original dynamic range.
So compressing then expanding cancels out the noise.
Because the hiss, the noise inherent in the analog circuit, gets added between the compression and expansion stages. When the expander pushes the dynamic range back out on the output, it also pushes that noise floor way down, along with the quiet parts of the signal. So the audible result is a much quieter pedal, a massive improvement over the CS1. That NE570, 571 chip was a real game changer for compact pedals.
Okay, quieter, more consistent, faster. And the VCA allowed for more control too, right? They kept level and sustain, but added something crucial.
They added the attack knob. This is where the CS2 really steps up from just being a sustainer to being a proper dynamic shaping tool.
With the CS1, the attack was fixed. You got what you got.
Exactly. With the CS2, you get to control how the pedal reacts to the very start of your note, the initial transient.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting for the player. How does fiddling with that attack knob actually change the feel?
It's all about that initial pick sound. You know, when you hit the string, there's that tiny, super loud peak, the click or thwack before the note really rings out. That's the transient. A fast attack setting tells the VCA to clamp down almost instantly. It grabs that peak right away. The result is a very compressed sound, that tight percussive pop. Think classic country snap or really tight funk rhythm, that rubber band kind of sound.
You're squashing the initial hit for maximum evenness.
Pretty much. Now, dial in a slow attack. The VCA waits just a little bit before kicking in. That lets the initial pick transient punch through before the compression starts working on the body of the note.
Ah, so you keep more of the initial impact.
Yeah. It gives you a smoother bloom or a more natural swell. It feels less processed, less squashed right at the start. Lead players often like this, or bassists who want that initial attack to really cut through but still want the sustain afterwards. That one knob let you tailor the compression's feel to your style, your instrument, your genre. It was huge.
So the overall sound was still smooth, still sustaining, but with more punch, more precision than the CS1.
Definitely. It was very musical, very responsive, still great for clean rhythm, but the added precision, the attack control, and crucially, that lower noise floor made it a hit with bass players too. It could control the low end without making it sound mushy.
But okay, the CS1 had that optical warmth, trying to mimic those classic studio units. Didn't moving to the VCA chip lose some of that magic? Was there a tone of trade-off people noticed?
Oh, for sure. There was a trade-off, but for many, the gains in control and low noise were worth it. The main thing people point to is that the CS2 generally sounds a bit darker than the CS1.
Okay, how so?
The VCA components, while precise, didn't quite have that same subtle high-frequency sparkle or unique coloration that the optical circuit naturally provided. It was a cleaner, maybe slightly more neutral sound, but could lack a touch of that CS1 air or warmth. But again, for studio guys or anyone building a complex rig, the attack control and the quiet operation made the CS2 the more practical professional tool.
And its reputation is kind of legendary, right? Especially the CS2.
Oh, yeah. It became a staple in Nashville, essential for that clean, consistent chicken picking. And it was all over 80s pop and rock records. A lot of tone hounds still say the CS2 is the best-sounding analog BOSS compressor ever made. It just hit this perfect balance, maybe, between VCA control and musical character.
A real sweet spot. But even that legend didn't stick around forever. 5 years later, BOSS replaced it again, leading us to the one that's still with us. Which brings us to Act 3, the CS3 compression sustainer. Launched in 1986, and it's still in production today. That's almost 4 decades.
That longevity says it all, really. It means BOSS finally landed on a formula, a mix of features, reliability, and price that just worked for a massive number of musicians worldwide. With the CS3, they weren't trying to reinvent the wheel again. It was more about refining and modernizing what the CS2 had started.
So architecturally, they stuck with the VCA approach, still based on that compander chip idea.
Yeah, fundamentally, it's still an analog VCA design, likely using an updated version or implementation of that NE570 compander philosophy. The core technology remained the same as the CS2.
Okay, so if the basic circuit type didn't change, what did they improve? What were the engineers focusing on this time around?
Two main things, it seems. Making it even quieter and giving it a bit more clarity, maybe through extending the frequency response. The CS3 is noticeably quieter than even the CS2. Less hiss.
Which would have been increasingly important by the late 80s, right? People stacking more pedals, using higher gain.
Exactly. Noise just accumulates in a signal chain. So getting the inherent hiss of the compressor down even further was a big goal. They engineered more of it out.
But the really obvious change, the thing players interact with, was adding that final knob to the controls.
The tone control, yep. Alongside level, attack, and sustain, you now had tone. This was really the last piece of the puzzle for complete tone shaping within the compressor itself.
And this feels like a direct answer, maybe a more flexible answer, to what the CS1 tried to do with that simple treble switch.
That's absolutely the connection to make. We talked about how heavy compression can make things sound dark, dampening the highs. The CS1 had that on-off treble boost. The CS3's tone knob gives you variable, continuous control over the high frequencies after the compression happens.
So you can dial in exactly how much sparkle you want to add back in, depending on how much you're squashing the signal.
Precisely. If you're really cranking the sustain, Maybe using humbuckers that are already a bit dark, you can turn up the tone knob to add brilliance and articulation back into the sound. Keep it from getting muddy.
Or the opposite, if you have really bright single coils, maybe you dial the tone back a bit to keep it smooth.
You got it. It lets you fine-tune the EQ voicing of the compressed signal in a way the older pedals just couldn't. It's incredibly useful.
And that flexibility must be why it's lasted so long. It covers a lot of ground.
That's its superpower. Versatility, set the sustain low, keep the tone moderate, and it's just subtle leveling. Great for acoustics or keeping clean rhythm parts really consistent without sounding obviously compressed.
But you can also crank it.
Oh yeah. Crank the sustain, maybe boost the tone, adjust the attack for snap, and you get that super squashed pop and clamp sound. Classic country, classic funk. But because you have both attack and tone controls, you can make sure it still cuts through and doesn't just sound like mush.
It really became the utilitarian workhorse. Does guitar, does bass, meets the needs of the masses.
Totally. But we have to talk about the critiques, right? The things tone purists sometimes say when they compare it to the beloved CS2.
Yeah, the common knock is that it sounds maybe less musical. Or a bit sterile compared to the CS2.
That's the gist of it. While the CS3 is undeniably cleaner and quieter, the sources often mention its mid-range response. It's perceived as being slightly scooped in the mids compared to the flatter, maybe punchier mid-range of the CS2.
Scooped mids. Why would that be? Just component choices.
Likely choices made back in '86, yeah. Maybe prioritizing that ultra-low noise and clarity over maintaining that specific mid-character of the CS2. The result is that, especially if you push the compression really hard, the CS3 can sometimes sound a little artificial or synthetic. It might lose some of that natural punch the CS2 is famous for.
But clearly, for most players, the advantages, the reliability, the fact you can find one anywhere, the low noise, and having all four of those controls outweighed any subtle mid-range differences.
Massively outweighed them. The CS3 became and remains a cornerstone. It defines the modern Bauhaus compressor sound for millions of players globally. Its incredible run proves they hit that sweet spot of control, performance, and value for the mass market. It took compression from just being about sustain to being about actively sculpting your dynamics and your frequency response.
Okay, so we've walked through these three pedals. Three distinct designs, spanning almost 50 years if you count the CS3's ongoing run. They really map out different eras of dynamic control. So let's zoom out. What's the big picture here? How did the DNA evolve from '78 to today?
It's a fantastic little history of solid-state audio tech, right there in three blue boxes. You can clearly trace the shifts in the core technology, the user controls, and what musicians were demanding at each point.
Let's start with the core architecture, that journey from light to voltage.
Right. CS1, 1978, that was analog optical. Key characteristics: warmth, organic feel, maybe a bit nonlinear, but the downsides were fixed timing, potential inconsistency between units, and noticeable noise.
Then came the big pivot.
CS2, 1981. Switched entirely to analog VCA using that NE570571 Compander chip. This brought precision, speed, consistency unit to unit, and a much lower noise floor. A huge step up in predictability.
And the CS3 refined that VCA approach.
CS3, 1986 present. Stayed with VCA, but focused on optimizing it further, pushing for the best possible frequency response, maximum clarity, and the lowest noise floor they could achieve at the time.
And that move from optical to VCA wasn't just about the sound, was it? It was huge for manufacturing.
Oh, absolutely. Those optical cells in the CS1, they could vary. They aged differently. Moving to the VCA and the integrated circuit meant BOSS could churn out pedal after pedal that performed reliably and sounded virtually identical. It was key to making the compressor a truly mass-market, dependable utility pedal, not just a quirky vintage effect.
Okay, so architecture dictates the core sound and consistency. What about the controls? How did the player's ability to interact change?
That's where you really see the evolution of empowering the musician. The CS1 was minimal. Level and sustain, that's it. You accepted the timing and the inherent tone.
Pretty limited by today's standards.
Then the CS2 added the game changer.
The attack control.
Right. Suddenly you could control the timing. You could shape how fast the compression grabbed the note. Decide if you wanted that sharp pop or that softer bloom. That fundamentally changed how people used compression. It wasn't just sustain anymore. It was dynamic shaping.
And the CS3 completed the set.
Added the tone control. Now you had frequency shaping after the compression. You could brighten it up, smooth it out, tailor the final EQ.
So the progression was level sustain only on the CS1.
And level sustain attack on the CS2, giving timing control.
And finally, level sustain attack tone on the CS3, adding frequency control.
Exactly. It's not random. It's engineers responding to what players needed and what the VCA technology enabled. By the CS3, you had a mini studio dynamics processor. Control over volume, amount of compression, timing, and EQ. It moved from organic simplicity, CS1, to controlled precision, CS2, to comprehensive flexibility, CS3.
Each one really defined sustained perfection for its time, didn't it? Balancing the sound, the noise, the control, all within the limits of the tech available to them.
For sure. The CS1 gave you that warm optical feel, but you paid for it with noise and rigidity. The CS2 nailed that balance of punchy VCA control and low noise, becoming a classic sound of its era. And the CS3 just delivered maximum versatility and quiet operation, making it the enduring standard for players who need total control over everything. Hashtag tag outro.
So this deep dive really lays it out. 3 distinct chapters in the Ball SS compression story. The foundational, warm, optical CS1. The punchy, controlled, VCA-based CS2, and the super versatile, still going strong CS3. Hopefully, understanding this evolution helps you, the listener, figure out what kind of compression fits your sound best. Are you chasing that vintage optical vibe, or do you need the clean, flexible control of the modern standard?
And that key moment, that pivot in the early 80s from optical to VCA, it's huge. Moving from the CS1's unique, sometimes quirky, aging light cell to the precise, predictable VCA chip in the CS2 was arguably the defining step in making compressors reliable mass-market tools. But it's interesting.
What's that?
Well, the VCA offered all that control, especially the attack knob and low noise, but it inherently didn't have the same subtle color as the optical unit. So Ball SS eventually had to add the tone knob on the CS3, partly to let players dial back in some of that brightness and clarity that maybe got lost in the shift away from the optical design's natural character.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. Imagine noise wasn't an issue. If Boss could wave a magic wand and make that original 1978 CS1 circuit totally silent, would that organic warmth, that slightly slower, unique optical reaction, would that still be the ultimate ideal for analog compression today?
Or has the precision, the linearity, the sheer speed and control offered by the VCA lineage fundamentally changed what we even expect a compressor to do now?
It's that classic audio dilemma, isn't it? Warmth and character versus precision and control.
Exactly. And the answer probably depends on what kind of music you play, what kind of feel you're going for. Is it the beautiful accident of light controlling sound or the predictable certainty of voltage? Something to think about.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a really iconic piece of musical gear, stuff that genuinely shaped the sound of an era, and, well, it still fascinates musicians and collectors today.
Absolutely, a true classic.
Talk about the Boss CS1 compression sustainer.
That's the one, released back in 1978. And you know, it wasn't just another pedal Boss put out. This was their very first compressor, a really foundational piece of kit.
Right. So for this deep dive, our mission really is to unpack what made the CS1 so unique. You know, how did its specific sound get into genres like funk and country, early rock?
Yeah.
And maybe crucially, how did it pave the way for the pedals that came after it? The CS2 and CS3, which loads of people know.
Exactly. We'll look at the tech, the tone, why it's still got this special vibe for players chasing that particular vintage kind of squish.
Okay, let's go back. 1978. What was the sort of the problem Boss was trying to solve for guitarists with the CS1? What was its job back then?
Well, think about it. Late 70s, guitarists needed consistency, right? They wanted notes to, hang in the air longer, get more sustain, and they wanted to polish up those clean tones, especially for recording or cutting through a live mix.
Makes sense.
So the CS1 was built for exactly that, evening out volume levels, stretching sustain, and just giving this clean, kind of refined tone shaping. Super valuable for funk articulation, country clarity, pop sparkle. Those really pristine, clean rock sounds, too.
It was about fitting the guitar neatly into the track.
Pretty much, yeah. Making it sit just right without a huge amount of fuss.
And what was the tech inside? What made it work so well right away? I know the later Boss compressors went a different route, but the CS1 had its own thing going on, didn't it?
It absolutely did, and this is really key to its unique sound. The CS1 used a VCA. That's a voltage-controlled amplifier circuit.
Okay, VCA.
Yeah, and that was quite different from the OTA operational transconductance amplifier designs that Boss used later in the CS2 and CS3.
Right, the OTA became more standard for them later.
Exactly. VCA designs, like in the CS1, they tend to have this really immediate, almost grabby response. They directly affect the signal's gain.
So it clamps down faster.
Yeah, gives it that distinct punchy feel and a very consistent, quick compression,
Yeah.
less subtle maybe than later designs.
Interesting. So a punchy VCA circuit. How did Boss let players actually control that? Was it complex? Lots of knobs?
No, classic Boss simplicity, really. Very straightforward. You just had a level knob, standard stuff, sets your output volume,
Wow.
and then a sustain knob. Now, this one was quite smart. It adjusted both the compression ratio, like how much squash you get, and also how long the note sustains. Simple, but effective.
Just two main knobs. But did it have something else, that little toggle switch, the one that gave it a voice its successors didn't quite have?
Ah, yes. You're talking about the legendary bright mode switch,
Yeah.
that mini toggle. It had two modes, bright and normal.
Right.
Normal mode was, well, normal. Smooth, pretty flat frequency response, gave a nice usable warmth for clean sounds, very solid. But the bright mode, yeah, that was the secret sauce. That's why people still hunt these things down. It gave a really significant boost to the high frequencies.
Added sparkle.
Exactly. Sparkle, cut, crispness, whatever you want to call it, made the tone really pop, especially good if you had darker pickups or maybe the darker sounding amp. It just gave the CS1 this unique top-end character that, crucially, the later Boss compressors just didn't replicate.
So that's the distinctive voice people talk about. It sounds like a pretty noticeable effect then, not subtle. Would you say it has that classic squishy feel?
Oh, definitely. It's got that noticeable compression, yeah. You can hear it working. That squishy, or sometimes people say pumped envelope feel.
Yeah.
It wasn't trying to be invisible like some modern studio compressors.
Just a character.
It had character,
Yeah.
absolutely. The compression was part of the sound, but in a really musical way. You know, the attack gets gently squeezed and then the note just blooms out with sustain. Gives it a lively, almost bouncy quality.
And that bright switch, you mentioned funk and country.
Yeah, it made it super appealing for that percussive stuff. Funk rhythms, country chicken picking, even reggae strumming, anything that benefited from extra clarity and that crisp attack.
And clearly some big names noticed this pretty quickly. Who were some of the early adopters?
Mm-hmm.
High-profile guitarists using the CS1 back then.
Oh yeah, some huge players. Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits is probably the most famous example. It was all over his early live rigs.
Really? For that super clean finger picking.
Exactly. That VCA circuit and the specific attack of the CS1 gave him that incredibly articulate, almost glassy pop on every note, made his fingerstyle playing just cut through with amazing clarity. It was totally integral to that early Dire Straits sound.
Wow. Okay, who else?
Well, you also had the Edge from U2. It likely popped up in his early 80s setups, you know, contributing to that consistent, shimmery, clean chime he's famous for.
Makes sense for his sound.
And Andy Summers of The Police, he used compression a lot. And the CS1 was definitely part of achieving his bright, clean, almost reggae-infused guitar tones. It just shows how versatile that bright, clear compression could be, you know?
Incredible how quickly it ended up on such important records and rigs. But like you said, technology moves on. Boss didn't just stop with the CS1, did they? It had a fairly short run considering its impact.
Yeah. Impactful but relatively brief. The CS1 itself was only made from 1978 to 1982, and importantly, they were all made in Japan back then.
You know, in Japan, always a key detail for a collector.
Always. Then it was replaced by the CS2 starting in 1981, which ran until 86. And after that came the CS3 in 86, which incredibly is still in production today, a real survivor.
Okay, so that brings us back to that big tech shift you mentioned, the VCA and the CS1 versus the OTA and the CS2 and CS3. How did that change the actual sound and feel of the pedals? What was the thinking there?
That's really the heart of the difference between them. The CS1 with its VCA gives you that punchy colored tone, right? A more obvious kind of squash.
Because the VCA is directly controlling the gain.
Exactly. Very immediate, very noticeable. When Boss switched to the OTA, the operational transconductance amplifier for the CS2 and CS3, the aim was different. They wanted a smoother, maybe more musical compression.
How does the OTA achieve that differently?
Well, OTA circuits derived their compression effect from controlling current, rather than directly manipulating voltage gain like a VCA. This generally results in a slightly softer attack and release. It feels less aggressive, maybe more transparent, because it doesn't clamp down quite so hard on the initial pick attack.
So the CS2 was the first OTA one.
Yes, and it quickly got a reputation for being warmer and more transparent than the CS1. And the CS3 kind of took that OTA idea and made it more Hi-fi, maybe, more
But
adjustable.
and I guess those circuit changes meant the controls evolved too. The CS1 was simple, but the later ones got more knobs.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The CS1 just level, sustain, and that crucial bright normal switch. The CS2 dropped the bright switch, which was a big change, but it added an attack control. That was new, let you shape how fast the compression kicks in. Still had level and sustain.
By giving you more control over the initial grab.
Right. Then the CS3 went even further. It kept level, attack, and sustain, but added a tone knob, so you could adjust the brightness or darkness directly on the pedal, making it the most flexible of the three by far.
Okay, so putting it all together, different tech, different controls. If someone plugs into all three, one after the other, what's the takeaway? What's the distinct sonic flavor of each one?
Right. Let's try to sum it up.
Yeah.
The CS1 definitely adds color. It's not about being invisible. You hear the compression working. It's got that lively, fast VCA response, great for funky, percussive stuff. The bright mode is unique, but can be pretty sharp, especially with single coils. Part of its charm, though.
Got it. CS1 is characterful, bright, squishy.
You nailed it. Then the CS2. Generally smoother, warmer, thanks to that OTA circuit. Feels maybe a bit more natural, reacts nicely to your playing dynamics. It lets more of the guitar's original tone through compared to the CS1. People love it for clean rhythm, subtle sustain boosts.
So CS2 is warmer, more natural, dynamic.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And then the CS3, that's the modern one. More hi-fi, cleaner maybe. The tone control is really useful for dialing it in perfectly. It generally has less noise than the older ones too, which is good for studio or high gain stuff.
But maybe less vintage mojo.
Some players might say it sounds a bit more clinical compared to the CS2, especially when you push it, but its versatility is undeniable. It does a lot of things well.
And as the pedals changed, the famous users changed too, right? Who kind of picked up this CS2 and CS3 after the CS1 guys?
Yeah, the user base shifted. Well, the CS1 had Knopfler, Edge, Summers. The CS2 became huge with players like John Frusciante of the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Johnny Marr from the Smiths. A lot of Nashville session guys loved the CS2 as well for that warm, natural thing we talked about.
Right. Fits their sounds perfectly.
And the CS3, well, being the current one, you see it everywhere. Modern country players, pop guitarists who need clean, reliable compression. Lots of bass players use the CS3 too. It's just a solid workhorse.
So, circling back to the original, the CS1, given its short production and unique sound, what's its status today? Still got that cult following.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe even stronger now than ever. Despite being made for only 4 years, it's really prized specifically because of that unique bright mode sound.
The thing the others don't have.
Exactly. There's just a certain voice to it, especially in that mode, that you can't quite get from the CS2 or CS3. That's a massive part of its appeal today.
And I guess that translates to collectability. People are hunting these down.
Oh, for sure. Those made in Japan CS1s, especially the really early ones with the silver screw holding the foot switch or the ones with the black label on the bottom, they're highly sought after.
Prices going up.
Definitely. Prices have climbed steadily. It's rarer than the CS2 and CS3, and it has that unique tone. People pay a premium for that combination. There's even a bit of a modding scene, though maybe not as big as for, say, tube screamers. People might do true bypass mods or sometimes tweak the bright mode to be a little less piercing with certain guitars.
Interesting. So if someone's listening and thinking about Boss Compression, how would you quickly compare their market standing today?
Okay, quick summary. The CS1 is the rare collectible, valued for its unique bright mode and punchy VCA sound. Harder to find, more expensive.
Right.
The CS2 is discontinued, but still very popular. Lots of players think it's the sweetest, most musical sounding of the bunch. Prices are creeping up on those two, especially MIJ ones.
The sweet spot pedal for many.
Kinda, yeah. And the CS3 is the readily available, affordable, modern option. Super versatile with the tone control, lower noise, but maybe lacks some of the vintage warmth or unique character of the first two for some ears. Polarizing, you could say. Each one definitely has its place.
What a fantastic journey through Boss Compression. So the Boss CS1 really was that foundational step, wasn't it? Delivering this distinctly bright, punchy, almost lively sound, all thanks to that VCA circuit and the brilliant idea of the two-mode switch. And even though it wasn't made for long, that unique personality, especially that bright mode, has kept it totally relevant for collectors, vintage gear lovers, and anyone chasing those specific late 70s, early 80s clean tones.
Absolutely. And you know, it makes you think.
Yeah.
Well, consider how one specific technical choice, like deciding to use a VCA circuit instead of an OTA back in the 70s, didn't just shape one pedal. It really influenced the sonic landscape of music for years, didn't it? It shaped how artists played and sounded and pushed future designs in different directions.
It's a great point. A small engineering choice with huge ripple effects.
Exactly. So maybe something for you listening to think about. What other subtle tech choices, maybe in other gear, other pedals, amps, recording stuff, what other small decisions do you think have had a really massive outsized impact on the music and the sounds that you love?
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping in for a really specific look at audio control. A deep dive, you might say.
Yeah, definitely getting into the specifics here.
Because if you play music or record it, or heck, even just appreciate well-mastered tracks, you know the struggle, right?
Yeah.
That constant battle.
Oh, yeah. Between keeping the natural feel, the dynamics.
And stopping those sudden loud peaks, those transients that just jump out.
The ones that clip your signal, make your speakers jump, or just wreck a perfectly good take. It's a nightmare sometimes.
Exactly. And, this battle, it's often fought with big, expensive gear in studios, racks full of stuff.
Right. But there was a need for something smaller, something portable, precise, something you could stick on a pedal board.
And that's where our mission today comes in. We're going to track the evolution of one specific solution from BOSS, the LM Limiter series.
And this is a really interesting lineage because it wasn't about squashing the sound like a typical compressor, that really heavy noticeable effect that changes how the instrument feels.
No, this was different. This was about precision. Surgical peak control almost. Clean.
That's the word. Clean control. We're looking at 3 key models in this family.
Right, we're charting the course from the original LM2, which was kind of studio focused.
Then the LM2B, which is zeroed in on bass guitar.
And finally, the one that's still around, the LMB3, the modern workhorse.
And we really need to nail this distinction right at the start. Limiter versus compressor, because those terms get mixed up all the time.
They really do. But BOSS had a very specific idea here, didn't they? Especially looking back at the source material.
Absolutely. You got to remember, back in the late 80s, BOSS already had the CS2 compressor sustainer. Huge hit.
Oh yeah, classic pedal.
And that pedal was designed to mess with the dynamics, to bring up the quiet bits, clamp down on the loud bits, and really its main job was to stretch out the note, sustain.
Right, making things last longer.
The LM2, though, it was cooked up as a cleaner, subtler alternative to that. That's the key difference in its origin.
So the goal was just fundamentally different. The CS2 compressor is like, I don't know, an artist shaping the sound, painting it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Shaping the attack, giving you that long singing sustain, making it sound and feel compressed.
Whereas the LM2?
The LM2 and the ones that followed, they had one job. Limiting. Think of it like an electronic safety valve. That's
safety valve. I like that.
It just stops the signal from going over a certain volume level, the threshold, but without messing with the tone or the feel when the signal is below that level.
So it's not always on, squeezing things.
Not at all. It's more like an emergency brake. It only clamps down for a split second when you hit that absolute ceiling you've set. Not like cruise control, which is kind of what a compressor does, always managing the level.
Okay, that makes sense. Compression for character and sustain.
Versus limiting for just pure stability. Peak control. That's the heart of this series.
And understanding that difference is crucial for getting what these pedals are about.
It really is. Our goal here for you, listening, is to see this line of pedals as a precision tool. It's for control. For consistency, especially live or when recording, where headroom is everything.
It's not really a character piece then, something you buy to radically change your instrument's sound.
Not primarily, no. It was a sophisticated solution for players who needed things just locked down, consistent.
Okay, let's unpack that original idea of precision. Let's go back to 1987. The blueprint, the LM2 limiter. So 1987, the LM2 arrives, and who it was aimed at really tells the story, doesn't it?
It really does. This wasn't really for the guitarist hunting for like endless sustain or super fuzzy tones.
Yeah.
It was squarely aimed at, well, studio players, guitarists, sure, but also keyboardists, bassists, people who needed clinical consistency, clean sound.
Like a professional control device, but in a pedal.
Exactly. It fit right into the high-end rigs people were building back then. Lots of rack gear, more complex setups.
And it was a response to technology changing too, right?
Definitely. The late 80s, you're seeing digital recording taking off, more complex rack systems in studios and even live rigs.
And digital is Less forgiving.
Much less forgiving. Clipping in analog might sound crunchy sometimes, but digital clipping, it's just nasty noise. A total disaster for a recording.
Right.
So you needed a reliable and crucially fast way to tame signals before they hit the input stage of your recorder or preamp.
And to get why the LM2 was so clean, so transparent, or maybe why it lacked character for something, we need to look under the hood at the circuit.
Yes, the architecture is key. The LM2 used an analog voltage-controlled amplifier, a VCA.
Okay, VCA. Break that down for us. Why is that important for dynamics?
So a VCA, in simple terms, it's the part of the circuit that actually turns the volume up or down. Think of it like an automated volume knob.
Automated how?
It's controlled by an electrical signal, not your hand. That signal comes from another part of the circuit called the detector. The detector listens to the input volume. If the detector senses the volume is getting too loud, crossing the threshold you set, it sends a specific voltage, a control voltage, to the VCA.
Telling you to do what?
Telling it to turn the volume down. Instantly. That's the gain reduction happening.
So the VCA is the muscle, reacting to the detector's instructions.
Yeah.
Why was VCA the right tech for this job? For transparent limiting?
One word. Speed. The source material mentions chips like the BA6110 or similar OTA's operational transconductance amplifiers. These VCA designs, especially OTA-based ones, are incredibly fast.
Faster than other types of compression circuits, like optical.
Much faster. Optical compressors or even FET compressors, they have a certain inherent lag in how quickly they react. Milliseconds, sure, but sometimes that's too long.
The peaks, the transients are super short.
Exactly. Those sharp spikes happen in fractions of a second. If your gain reduction circuit isn't fast enough to react within that fraction of a second, the transient just blows right past it. It clips the signal before the pedal even has a chance to clamp down.
I see. So the LM2's whole reason for being depended on reacting faster than the peak itself. That's the VCA advantage.
Precisely. Now, the VCA architecture itself wasn't unique to the LM2. BOSS used VCAs in the CS series compressors too.
Right.
But here, the optimization was totally different. It was all geared towards limiting, not creating sustain. And the way they achieved that subtle, non-squashing sound is interesting.
How did they do that? Balancing the speed without making it sound harsh.
Part of the magic was using what's called soft knee limiting. This is a really key technical detail.
Okay, knee. Explain that.
In dynamics, the knee describes how abruptly the compression or limiting kicks in once the signal goes over the threshold.
So there's a hard knee and a soft knee.
Right. A hard knee limiter is like hitting a brick wall. The instant your signal touches that threshold level, bang, the full amount of limiting is applied.
Effective, I guess.
Very effective at stopping peaks cold, yeah. But it can sound really obvious. You hear the volume suddenly drop, and it can feel unnatural, unmusical sometimes.
Okay, so soft knee is gentler.
Much gentler. With a soft knee, the compression ratio doesn't just slam on at the threshold. It starts to increase gradually as the signal approaches the threshold and then crosses it.
So it eases into the limiting, like a curve instead of a sharp corner.
Exactly like a curve.
Hmm.
It makes that transition into limiting much smoother, much less noticeable to the ear, even when it's catching a big peak.
Okay.
So you combine that smooth, soft knee approach with the really fast attack time of the VCA, plus a release time you could adjust.
Get to the controls in a sec.
Right. But that combination, fast attack, soft knee, variable release, that's what made the circuit brilliant at catching transients without sounding clunky or harsh. It met that need for transparent, professional control.
Okay, let's look at those controls then. 3 knobs, level, threshold, and release. Level's pretty obvious output volume.
Straightforward, yeah. Sets your final output gain after the limiting happens.
But threshold and release are the core dynamic controls here.
Yep.
Talk us through threshold first.
Threshold is your ceiling. It's the exact point, the volume level where the limiting starts. You set this based on how loud you expect your peaks to be and how much you want to shave off.
So if I slap my bass really hard, I might set it lower.
Probably, yeah. To catch those big spikes. If you're a keyboard player with a huge dynamic range but only want to stop the absolute loudest moments from clipping, you might set it higher. It's about defining that maximum allowed level.
And release, that's about how fast it lets go.
Exactly. It's the recovery speed. How quickly does the pedal stop limiting after the peak has gone back down below the threshold?
Why is that adjustable? Why not just have it be super fast too?
Because you need to tune it to the music, to the instrument. If you set the release too fast, the limiter snaps back to 0 gain reduction instantly. This can cause an audible pumping effect, where the volume seems to bounce up unnaturally right after a loud hit. Sometimes you even get distortion artifacts.
Okay, so too fast is bad. What about too slow?
If the release is too slow, the pedal stays in limiting mode longer than necessary. It might still be reducing the gain even when the next note you play is actually quieter. That can make your sound thin out or lose impact on subsequent notes.
So you need to find this sweet spot.
You really do. That variable control lets you dial in a smooth, natural recovery that fits the rhythm and feel of what you're playing. It's crucial for transparency.
Let's talk about the sound itself. The LM2 is consistently described as, well, transparent and fast. It keeps the instrument's natural dynamics mostly intact.
That was the goal and largely the achievement. The use cases listed in the source material really show why that transparency mattered.
What were some key applications?
First and foremost, taming those sounds with big transients. Think funk guitar rhythm where you get those sharp chord stabs, or slap bass, obviously.
Right.
Or even keyboards with really aggressive velocity curves, where hitting a key hard produces a massive jump in volume. The LM2 just smoothed out those peaks, making the performance level much more consistent.
Which is vital in a mix, right? Consistency.
Absolutely vital, especially in tighter, modern mixes. You can't have one instrument suddenly leaping out unpredictably.
What else?
It was great for instruments with high output active pickups, active basses, active guitars. You can have huge signal swings. The LM2 helped tame those before they overloaded whatever came next in the chain.
Like protecting your gear.
Exactly. That's the third use case. Preamp input protection. If you've got a nice tube preamp or a sensitive input on your recording interface, the LM2 acted like a bodyguard. It stopped unexpected signal surges from hitting that input too hard and causing distortion or even damage.
Safety net again.
Yep. And lastly, it was noted for helping tighten up high-frequency content. Sometimes really bright guitars or keyboards can sound brittle or harsh when those high-frequency transients spike. The LM2 could smooth those edges without making the overall tone dull.
So the pros seem clear. Really good peak control, very clean, no real color added, and faster than a lot of compressors at the time.
Definitely. But that strength, that transparency, it was also its weakness in the eyes of some players.
How so?
Well, like we touched on, it was often seen as too clean. If you bought it expecting that thick, chewy, sustainy compression like you got from a CS2 or similar pedals,
You'd be disappointed.
you'd be very disappointed. Because it was so focused on just limiting peaks, it didn't really add much audible compression or sustain below the threshold. So some guitarists especially, they wanted that obvious effect sound, and the LM2 didn't really deliver that. Its transparency was seen as a lack of character by some.
A classic case of managing expectations, maybe.
Totally. And there's one more technical thing to keep in mind, especially with vintage gear.
Yes. The noise floor.
The source material mentions that early analog VCA circuits, well, they can introduce a bit of noise, especially if you push them really hard.
Now, would you push it hard?
By setting the threshold really low, meaning you're asking it to limit very frequently or trying to get a lot of gain reduction out of it, when the VCA is working constantly like that, you might hear a subtle increase in background hiss.
Just part of the deal with that era's analog tech.
Pretty much. It was often considered the price you paid for that speed and clean limiting action. Usually not a big deal unless you were really cranking things.
So looking back, the LM2 was significant because it kind of brought studio-level precision control into a compact pedal format.
It absolutely did. It was part of BASS pushing towards making these more utility studio-grade pedals available to everyone. It helped popularize the idea of transparent dynamics control on pedal boards, whether they were simple live rigs or those burgeoning rack systems.
It set a standard for what a compact limiter could be.
Yeah, a precision tool. Focused on control, surgically dealing with peaks, it really raised the bar. But interestingly, even as they launched it, BOSS knew there was one instrument whose needs were so unique.
That even the LM2 wasn't quite the perfect fit.
Exactly. The bass guitar.
Okay, this part is really interesting to me. The LM2B bass limiter came out at the same time as the LM2 in 1987.
Yeah, a dual launch, which is pretty remarkable.
It shows that right from the get-go, BOSS engineers knew that bass dynamics were a whole different beast. They didn't just release the LM2 and wait for bass players to complain.
Nope. They understood, seemingly immediately, that the physics of low-frequency energy are just fundamentally different. A standard guitar limiter wasn't going to cut it for bass.
Why not? What's so different down there?
Bass guitar fundamentals, especially on lower strings, carry massive amounts of energy at very low frequencies. We're talking, 40 hertz, 50 hertz, frequencies that the original LM2's detector circuit wasn't really optimized to hear properly.
So it wouldn't react correctly to bass peaks.
It wouldn't react as effectively, especially to the really deep ones. If you try to control the dynamics of a bass signal without properly accounting for that huge low-end energy, you risk either letting those peaks through anyway, or worse, clamping down in a way that just sucks all the power and punch out of the sound.
Okay, so they needed a specialized version, the LM2B. Did it use the same core circuit?
The core engine, yes, it was still that fast analog VCA topology from the LM2. So you still got that transparent gain reduction capability.
But they had to tweak it specifically for bass.
Right. The main modifications were in the sensing part of the pedal, the EQ filtering within the detector path. Basically, they changed what the pedal was listening for.
To make it more sensitive to bass frequencies.
Exactly. The detector circuit needed to accurately sense peaks happening way down low. Otherwise, a huge spike at, say, 40 hertz from slapping an E string could just sail right past the detection system, even if higher frequencies were being limited.
Okay, let's get specific about those frequency adjustments. What did they change?
Two key things based on the source material. First, they gave the LM2B an extended low-frequency response in its detector. It was specifically engineered to hear and react to frequencies well below 50 hertz.
To handle the fundamentals of 4-string, even 5-string basses.
Precisely. Without that, those deep, powerful peaks would remain uncontrolled, potentially clipping your amp or the recording input. Tuning the detector down low meant the pedal could finally manage that immense low-frequency energy properly.
Okay, that covers the low end. But the notes also say they slightly rolled off the high frequencies in the detector path. That seems weird if you want transparency. Why cut highs?
It seems counterintuitive, but it was a clever fix for a specific problem with bass transients and fast limiters.
What problem?
When you play bass, aggressively slapping, popping, you generate not just the big, low fundamental, but also incredibly sharp, clicky, high-frequency transients at the very start of the note, the attack.
Right, that clank or snap.
Yeah. If the LM2B's super-fast VCA reacted too strongly to those little high-frequency spikes, it could cause what the source calls clicking artifacts.
What does that sound like? Is it audible?
Oh, yeah. It's that nasty, almost metallic tick sound you sometimes hear when a slap note hits a limiter too hard. It's the sharp, high-frequency edge, basically tricking the detector into overreacting for a split second. Sounds really unpleasant and unnatural.
I think I know the sound you mean.
So, by gently rolling off those extreme highs just in the detector path, not the main audio path, they made sure the limiting action was primarily triggered by the real problem, the big, low-frequency energy peaks.
So it ignored the clicky bits a little.
It paid less attention to them, yeah. This stopped those artifacts without really dulling the overall audible high end of the bass tone itself too much. A really smart, subtle piece of engineering.
Very cool. So tonally, the LM2B was designed for smooth, natural control of those aggressive bass techniques, slap, pop, heavy finger style without killing the punch.
That was the idea. It was all about getting stability without sacrificing the core tone. Its applications were super practical, especially for live bass players.
Like what?
Preventing speaker overdrive was a big one. An unconstrained bass peak hitting a PA system or a bass amp can cause serious damage or just sound awful.
In there.
Right. It also helped maintain consistent punch and clarity, so your quiet passages weren't lost and your loud passages didn't overwhelm everything else.
What about using it with other pedals, like drive?
Crucial application. Bassists often use overdrive or fuzz pedals, which can massively boost the signal peaks. The LM2B was often placed after the drive pedal to tame that boosted signal.
To stop the driven sound from clipping the amp.
Exactly. It ensured the distorted tone was powerful but controlled, not just a fuzzy mess overloading the input stage or the PA.
So like the LM2, its job wasn't sustain. It was dynamic shield, but specifically for the low end.
Precisely. Keep the articulation, keep the low-end power, keep it quiet, give it the right headroom. But again, the main consideration was it's not a compressor in the traditional sense. No added sustain, no real coloration, just peak control for bass.
Now, even though it seems like a vital tool, maybe one of the first compact limiters really for bass.
It was definitely among the pioneers, yeah.
It had a shorter production run than the LM2, only 87 to 94. Why was it discontinued relatively quickly?
I think that shorter run really shows its role as a transitional product. It absolutely proved the need for dedicated bass dynamics processing, and it established the basic technical approach.
What?
But the market, the players, they quickly realized they wanted more. The L to B did the control job, but maybe it was too subtle sometimes. Players found that heavy limiting, while controlling dynamics, could sometimes dull the perceived high-end clarity of the bass.
The side effect of clamping down hard.
Exactly. So they needed the control, but they also wanted maybe a bit more flexibility and some way to get that sparkle or presence back.
So the LM2B, while successful, paved the way for something more advanced.
Directly. It laid the groundwork, proved the concept, and its limitations directly inspired the development of its successor, the LMB3, the pedal that added the flexibility and the tone shaping that bassists were starting to ask for.
Which marks a really interesting shift in Boss's thinking, right? Moving from just pure control to, well, controlled enhancement.
A huge shift. And that brings us to the modern era.
Okay, so 1995, the LMB3 arrives. And this one is still going strong today.
Yep, nearly 30 years in production. That's incredible longevity for any effects pedal. Tells you they really nailed something with this design.
It didn't just replace the LM2B, did it? The notes say it effectively replaced both the LM2 and the LM2B.
In practice, yeah. While technically bass-focused, its feature set made it versatile enough that it became the go-to BISS limiter solution for many applications. It synthesized the whole lineage.
So what were the big changes? What made the LMB3 the design that stuck architecturally first?
Well, they kept the core philosophy. It still used an analog VCA limiter circuit at its heart, keeping that essential speed for peak catching.
Still analog VCA.
Okay. But they made significant internal upgrades. The source material points to an improved noise floor quieter operation and greater headroom compared to the LM2B.
Addressing that potential noise issue from the earlier models.
Exactly. Making it much cleaner, more suitable for modern recording standards, quieter rigs. That alone was a big step up.
A necessary evolution.
Yeah.
But the real reason the LMB3 became the standard, the workhorse, seems to be two major new features. User-facing controls.
Absolutely. These are game changers. Let's talk about the first one, which really altered its fundamental dynamic character, the ratio control.
Ratio. The LM2 and 2B didn't have that, right? They were just limiters.
Essentially, yeah. Once you hit the threshold, they clamp down hard. The limiting ratio was fixed and very high, maybe 10.1, 20.1, or even effectively infinite, like a brick wall.
So what does adding a ratio knob do?
It gives you flexibility. It lets you decide how hard the pedal clamps down once the signal crosses the threshold. It adjusts the strength of the compression or limiting.
So you could set it low for gentle compression?
Right, you could dial in a mild ratio like 2.1 or 3.1. At those settings, it acts more like a traditional compressor, gently smoothing out the dynamics, maybe adding a touch of sustain even below the main threshold.
Or you could still crank it up for hard limiting.
Exactly. Turn the ratio knob way up, and it behaves much more like the old LM2 severe peak shaving, that protective brick wall function.
Wow, okay, so it could be a subtle smoother or a hard limiter, depending on how you set it.
Precisely. That versatility meant the LMB3 could meet the needs of way more players and styles. It wasn't just a one-trick pony for stopping peaks anymore. It offered a spectrum of dynamic control.
That's huge. It kind of blurs the line between limiter and compressor, letting the user choose.
It does, but the second major innovation is maybe even more defining for the LMB3's sound and longevity. That's the enhancer circuit.
Right, the limiter enhancer. What does the enhanced knob do?
This reflects that need we just talked about, players wanting stability and clarity. The enhancer circuit is basically BOS's clever way to counteract a potential downside of limiting. That heavy limiting, especially fast VCA limiting, can sometimes make the tone feel a bit dull or muted. It clamps down hardest on the loudest parts of the signal, which often includes those high-frequency transients, the stuff that gives an instrument its bite, its definition, its air.
So limiting can make you sound less clear.
It can, especially if you're hitting it hard. The perceived clarity can diminish. The enhancer is designed to fix that.
How? Is it just an EQ boost?
It's smarter than that. It's a dynamic EQ. It actively boosts high frequencies, adding sparkle and presence back into the sound.
Okay, but why dynamic? What does that mean here?
It means the boost isn't just on all the time. Critically, it boosts the highs in response to your playing intensity. When you play harder and the limiter is likely working more, the enhancer kicks in more to restore that perceived clarity.
So it's not just adding a constant treble boost and hiss when you're not playing.
Exactly. That's the problem with just using a static EQ pedal after a limiter. You'd boost the noise floor too. The dynamic nature of the enhancer means it only adds that brightness when it's needed when you're actually playing aggressively. It brings back the definition right when the limiting might be taking it away.
That's pretty sophisticated, like a psychoacoustic trick almost.
It really is. It functions a bit like a high-frequency exciter, but one that's intelligently linked to the input dynamics.
So now you've got 4 knobs.
Yeah.
Level, enhance, threshold, and ratio.
Yeah.
That's a lot more control than the original LM2.
A huge amount more control. It gives the bassist, or whoever's using it, really fine-grained command over both the dynamic stability and the final perceived tone.
Which explains why it's been so popular for so long. What's the resulting sound profile like?
It can be very full and transparent if you keep the enhance down and use a gentle ratio. But you can dial in just the right amount of sparkle and attack definition using that enhanced control.
Ideal for certain styles.
Absolutely perfect for slap and funk bass. You get that super precise, clean attack articulation from the enhance, while the limiter keeps the overall volume completely under control no matter how hard you dig in.
So you can really attack the strings without blowing up the mix.
Exactly. It's also great, as the notes mention, for passive basses. Sometimes passive basses can sound a bit dark or lack top-end bite compared to active ones. The enhanced control can dynamically add that clarity back in.
And just generally for live playing.
For any live rig, it provides that crucial dynamic stability, ensuring the bass sits consistently in the mix, but with the added benefit of maintaining presence, making sure you cut through without necessarily being louder overall.
Okay, so pros. Versatile dynamic control.
Yeah.
From gentle compression to hard limiting.
Mm-hmm.
Low noise. And that independent enhanced control for tonal fine-tuning. Seems like they covered all the bases.
It really is a very well-rounded design. Versatile enough for bass, but people use it on other things too because of that flexibility.
Are there still any downsides or things to watch out for, even with this refined design?
Yeah, a couple of things are worth mentioning. First, that enhanced control, while brilliant, needs care.
How so?
If you tune it up too high, it will start to exaggerate unwanted noises. String squeaks, fret buzz, finger noise, all that stuff lives in the high frequencies too.
So it enhances the good and the bad highs if you overdo it.
Precisely. You need to find that sweet spot where it adds clarity and presence without making your playing sound sloppy or noisy. Judicious use is key.
Good tip. What else?
Just to reiterate that core philosophy, which still holds true even with the ratio knob, the LMB3 is still primarily designed for dynamic control and clarity, not for creating massive amounts of obvious, squishy compression or sustain.
So if I want that really long singing sustain, I should probably still look elsewhere.
You probably should, yeah. While you can get some compression and sustain with the ratio turned down, its heart is still in the limiter camp. If heavy, obvious compression is your goal, a dedicated compressor pedal like a Bios CS3 or something similar is likely a better tool for the job.
Got it. Control first, sustain second.
That's a good way to think about it. But its enduring success really speaks for itself. The LMB3 just became this quiet professional on countless pedal boards from the mid-90s onwards. It's a combination of everything BOSS learned from the LM2 and LM2B.
It really sounds like it took the best parts of its predecessors and added what was missing.
It took the precision concept from the LM2, incorporated the crucial low-end understanding from the LM2B, and then layered on that modern flexibility with ratio and the tone recovery of the enhancer. Stability plus clarity, that's the LMB3 formula.
Okay, we've walked through each pedal. Now let's kind of pull back and look at the whole series, the evolution side by side.
Yeah, comparing them really highlights how BOSS adapted to what players needed over time. It's a neat snapshot of dynamics processing development.
So quick recap, LM2, 1987, the original.
Analog VCA, full range target, soft knee. Its entire focus was clean, transparent, peak limiting. Pure control was the name of the game. Maybe, arguably, too transparent for some effects users.
Then, same year, LM2B, the specialist.
Still that core VCA circuit, but laser focused on bass. Key features. Detector tune way down low for bass fundamentals, and that subtle high-frequency roll-off in the detector to stop the clicking artifacts from slap. Pure bass dynamic control.
And finally, LMB3, 1995, the survivor.
Right. Kept the analog VCA core but improved the noise and headroom. Then added the game changers, the variable ratio control for flexible dynamics, compression or limiting, and that dynamic enhancer circuit to bring back high-end clarity. Stability plus adjustable sparkle, the most versatile of the bunch.
Looking at that progression, LM2 to LM2B to LMB3, what does it tell us about BOSS's overall philosophy when it comes to dynamics pedals?
I think it shows a couple of consistent threads. First, a real focus on precision and signal integrity. They weren't really trying to create heavy coloration effects with this series.
Unlike maybe some other compressor designs out there?
Exactly. The LM lineage feels like it was engineered primarily to solve a technical problem managing peaks, preventing clipping rather than being designed purely as a tone-shaping effect. The goal was controlling the signal without fundamentally mangling the instrument's core character.
But they did adapt, didn't they?
Yeah.
The LMB3 isn't just about pure control.
That's the second thread, responsiveness to user needs and evolving demands. They started with that strict, simple peak management in the LM2, pure transparency. Then they realized bass needed specialization with the LM2B. And finally, with the LMB3, they acknowledged that just stopping peaks wasn't enough for many modern players. You also needed flexibility, ratio, and tools to maintain perceived clarity enhancer, especially in busy live mixes.
So they moved from just technical perfection to something more musically practical.
I think that's fair. It's an acceptance that pure, unadulterated transparency isn't always the only goal. Sometimes the control itself needs to be paired with features that help the controlled signal sound good and present in a musical context.
And through all of this, they stuck with analog VCA technology.
Yep. Right up to the current LMB3. That shows a commitment to that specific analog approach, likely chosen for its speed, reliability, and perhaps a certain musicality in how it reacts compared to, say, purely digital limiting. These were built as robust, performance-ready tools.
So if we had to summarize the core job of the entire LM series for someone,
I'd say it's about providing transparent, reliable, dynamic stability for professional use. Whether you need to tame the peaks of a bright guitar, level out a synth with wild dynamics, or lock down a booming bass.
these pedals were designed as control tools, built for consistency, built for performance.
Exactly. In a way, they free up the musician. They let you play dynamically, play aggressively, without constantly worrying about overloading the next thing in your signal chain. The pedal acts as that silent guardian, that subtle safety net.
Protecting the peaks while preserving the heart of the tone.
That's the ideal, yeah. It's the difference between an engineering solution designed to prevent problems and a creative effect designed to add overt character. The LM series leans heavily towards the former.
And the fact the LMB3 is still a catalog item almost 3 decades on. Well, that says a lot about how well they finally balanced that equation.
It really does. The problem of managing dynamics hasn't gone away, and their solution clearly hit a sweet spot that still resonates with players today. Hashtag outro.
So we've traced that journey from the purely transparent, almost clinical LM2 back in '87,
Through the necessary specialization of the LM2B for bass.
right up to the incredibly versatile, long-lasting LMB3, the limiter enhancer. That's still a standard on so many boards.
It's a really cool case study, actually, watching how Boss S responded to what musicians needed. They started by fixing a technical issue, clipping peaks clean and simple.
Right.
And then they refined that solution based on the more holistic needs of the player, needing not just stability, but also perceived clarity and flexibility in the final sound.
And that refinement, that evolution, it leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, something to chew on.
We saw this clear shift, right, from the LM2 era, where the demand was seemingly for clean control, pure transparency above all else.
To the LMB3 era, where the demand became controlled clarity. That enhancer circuit isn't just a bonus. For many users, it's essential.
It really is. Which poses an interesting question, I think, for anyone designing or even just choosing audio gear today, especially dynamics tools.
Is pure, uncolored transparency always the ultimate goal? The holy grail?
Or does the modern musician, perhaps conditioned by decades of effects, now expect or even demand that even utility tools like limiters provide some kind of subtle, maybe dynamic tonal benefit alongside their core technical function?
Does control now have to come with a side of enhancement to be truly useful?
The enduring success of the LMB3 with its enhancer certainly suggests that for many, the answer is yes. Control needs to actively contribute to a present musical sound, not just passively prevent problems.
Something to think about next time you step on a dynamics pedal. Is it just protecting your sound, or is it actively helping shape it for the better? Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are cracking open the file on a really interesting one, the Boss SS EH2 enhancer.
Oh, yeah.
Released in 1990, and I think it's safe to say it's one of the most misunderstood pedals they ever made.
Absolutely. It's kind of a ghost in their lineup.
It is. You look at it, you see 4 knobs, you think, okay, simple tone shaper. But the sources we dug into They reveal this incredibly complex hybrid architecture.
So our mission today really is to cut through all that confusion. We want you to finally understand what this dynamic high-frequency processor actually is.
And why it was, honestly, decades ahead of its time.
Okay, let's get right into that because this is the key thing you need to grasp from the get-go. The EH2 it's just fundamentally different from an EQ pedal.
Right. And it's not a compressor either, though. It shares some DNA there.
It's this analog circuit that is dynamically analyzing what you're playing. It's actually listening, and then it decides how to enhance the sound. Think of it as a tone corrector, not a tone creator. A normal EQ pedal, it just boosts the frequency range and hopes for the best.
Right, it's static.
Exactly. This thing uses an envelope-sensitive harmonic restoration circuit. It's basically an analog version of a modern smart EQ.
Wow. So it's delivering studio-level thinking, but in a little metal box?
That's the big aha moment right there. It's analyzing your signal before it does anything. That's the whole magic trick.
So, okay, if it's not an EQ, what is it actually doing to the sound? What's its role?
Its main job is to provide this sort of hi-fi clarity. It's designed for instruments where crisp articulation is really important.
Like what?
Clean electric guitar, definitely. Acoustic electric instruments, bass, anything where you need the notes to really pop.
And the sources all agree on this one critical distinction. It is not just a treble booster.
Not even close. If you just wanted more treble, yeah, you just twist a knob on your amp. The EH2 is so much more surgical than that.
So what's it targeting? What's it doing that a simple EQ can't?
What's so fascinating is that it selectively emphasizes the harmonic content, the overtones, not the fundamental notes.
Okay.
And it only brings in that enhancement based on your playing dynamics. The harder you smack the string, the more that enhancement circuit kicks in.
So it's not just making the whole picture brighter. It's like it's sharpening the focus, but only on the parts of the image that need it most.
That's a great analogy. It adds this delicate shimmer to clean tones. It improves clarity, the upper mids and highs.
Yeah.
It just makes your pick attack so much more articulate.
But without getting harsh or brittle.
That's the key. It never feels that way. For a bassist, it can tighten up the sound, make everything clearer, more present. It's like pulling a curtain away from your speakers without actually changing the character of your instrument.
That makes perfect sense. It's less of an effect and more like advanced tone maintenance. It's proactive.
Exactly.
But to get that dynamic response, that's the tricky part. We have to go under the hood here. How did BOSS pull this off with analog parts in 1990?
This is where the engineering is just brilliant. It's a hybrid analog processing architecture, and the whole thing revolves around envelope detection.
It's listening to the attack.
It's listening to the shape of the note. They basically build a tiny analog computer that decides the timing and the intensity of this spectral boost.
So this dynamic spectral enhancement, as they called it, it's analyzing the signal first.
Always. And the enhancement it adds depends on three things from your playing: the amplitude, how hard you play,
Right.
the frequency content that's already there in your raw signal, and most importantly, the speed of your attack transients.
So how fast you hit the note.
Precisely. That's what makes it feel so connected to your hands. It's incredibly responsive.
Okay, let's break down the architecture. The sources are pretty clear. There are three main parts that make this work.
Yeah, let's get into it. First, you have the envelope follower.
The pedal's ear.
Exactly. It's constantly monitoring your signal, and it tells the high-frequency harmonic exciter how intense to be.
So it's saying, okay, he's hitting it hard now, apply more polish.
You got it. Then there's the dynamic filter. This is the sculptor. It shapes the frequency range of the enhanced signal. It decides where in the spectrum to apply that polish.
And the third part ties it all together, the blend mixer.
Correct. That's your balance control, your mix knob. It lets you dial in the exact amount of that new enhanced signal with your original dry tone.
And that's key to keeping it subtle, I'd imagine.
It's everything. If you push that mix knob too far, you just lose the natural sound you were trying to polish in the first place.
And if the whole point is clarity and polish, I'm guessing the technical specs were pretty clean.
They had to be. It's a standard BOSS buffered bypass, but the engineers made sure the noise floor was incredibly low.
Which you'd need if you're boosting harmonics. The last thing you want is more hiss.
Absolutely. And they really nailed it. The controls mix, enhance, frequency, and a mode switch give you really surgical control over that clarity.
Okay, so let's talk about using it. Where does this subtle polish tool actually shine out in the real world?
Well, first, you have to manage your expectations. It's not a dramatic effect like a fuzz pedal.
Right, it's not going to blow you away immediately.
No, it feels more like a dynamic presence lift.
Yeah.
The idea is similar to those big, expensive studio rack units, like an Aphex Oral Exciter, but Bios just shrunk it down and made it more gentle.
Okay, wait a minute, though. If the effect is that subtle, and the pedal is pretty rare now, why wouldn't a modern player just use, I don't know, a high-quality EQ plugin? Or just tweak their amp?
That is the crucial question, and the answer is the dynamic response. A static EQ is blind. It doesn't care how you play. With the EH2, when you hit a string hard, that high-end enhancement blooms for a moment, and then it gets out of the way as the note sustains.
I see.
That responsiveness is what makes your instrument feel so much more alive. A static tone stack just can't replicate that feel.
Okay, you've sold me. Let's get concrete. Give me the killer use cases where that dynamic feel really makes a difference.
For clean electric guitar, it's a secret weapon. For Nashville, pop, funk, R&B, anywhere, you need that pristine note clarity to cut through a mix without sounding thin.
Right.
For acoustic electric players, it's a lifesaver, especially with those older, brittle-sounding piezo pickups. It adds sparkle without that harsh ice pick quality you get from just cranking the treble.
Oh, I know that sound. It's like a bag of tin cans. This fixes that.
Completely. And for bass players, especially slappers, the EH2 just tightens up the attack. It makes every pop and slap so precise and articulate, but the low end stays solid.
It also sounds like it would be a great utility pedal.
It's the ultimate finishing move for a signal chain. Perfect for brightening up a naturally dark amplifier. It can restore the high end you lose from long cable runs.
So it's a problem solver.
Huge one. A lot of studio guys seek them out now just to polish DI signals during recording, because that kind of dynamic clarity is really hard to get right with digital tools.
But we have to talk about the downsides. If it's designed to enhance your attack, what do you need to watch out for?
You have to remember its purpose. It's a polished tool. And because it's enhancing all that harmonic detail, if you set the enhance control too high, it will ruthlessly highlight string noise.
So fret buzz, finger squeaks.
All of it. I bet that's why some players hated it at first. They thought their guitar was suddenly noisy, but really the pedal was just being brutally honest about their technique.
Exactly. It's not a distortion pedal, it's a high-fidelity lens.
Use it to refine, not to reshape.
So let's talk legacy. Why should this, sophisticated but niche analog pedal from 1990 still matter to us today?
The EH2 is just a perfect snapshot of Bawes's experimental era in the late 80s and early 90s. This was when they were trying to take these complex studio rack processes.
Things only big recording studios had.
Right, and they were trying to distill them into these little stomp boxes for the average guitarist. It was incredibly ambitious.
And those experimental pedals are always the most interesting ones, aren't they? They're often overlooked because they don't fit into a neat little box.
That's the EH2 story, to a T. It wasn't a huge commercial hit because most players wanted overdrive or chorus, but it became this quiet weapon for session musicians and tone purists who understood what it was doing.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me. The EH2 was kind of an analog prophet, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. Bios essentially built an analog plug-in decades before digital could handle this kind of complex dynamic work reliably.
So all the stuff we see now.
Think about it. The whole concept of dynamic spectral enhancement. It didn't die when they stopped making the EH2 in '94. That idea became central to modern digital modelers, multi-band exciters, smart EQs.
The EH2 is the analog blueprint for all of them.
It was genuinely one of the most forward-thinking designs Bios has ever released.
So what's its status now? Is it just a collector's item?
It's a collector's sleeper favorite because it offers this super nuanced dynamic enhancement that sounds so uniquely analog. It has this smooth, almost optical quality to it. So players who use clean or edge of breakup rigs, they hunt these things down for that final layer of studio polish.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. The Bawes EH2 enhancer, an incredibly subtle but powerful tone polishing tool.
And remember, it wasn't about just boosting treble. It was about enhancing harmonic detail dynamically, giving your signal that refined studio clarity without changing the soul of your instrument. It was innovative, it was complex, and it was truly ahead of its time.
Which leaves us with a great question for you to think about. If a complex dynamic analog circuit like the EH2 could bring that kind of studio polish to a pedal board back in 1990, what other highly nuanced studio processes are out there right now just waiting to be distilled into specialized analog tools for the rest of us?
Are we hitting the limit of what specialized analog can do, or is there still some untapped magic out there waiting to be discovered?
Something to chew on. We'll see you next time.